Jay, I think you're on, right?
Hello.
How you doing?
All right. How are you?
Good. Nice library.
It's a bit of a mess, unfortunately. I don't have anything in any kind of order.
Well, as long as you know where they are.
I don't. That's the problem. I could spend hours looking for a book.
Yeah.
It's never really recovered from when I did the casebook, and I had just a sea of books on my floor. Somewhere there's a picture of it. It's just ridiculous. I tried to do a panoramic photo of it. It seemed to go on forever. I had 20 books open to various spots stacked on top of each other.
Let's see. We got people coming in. I thought I'd put this thing on where everybody gets admitted automatically, but I'm having to click every time to allow them. So but we're a little early still. Where are you right now?
I'm in Brooklyn.
Cool. I haven't spent enough time in Brooklyn. I went to the SABR meeting. When was that? 2017 maybe. The
New York one. Yeah, I think that was 17. Yeah.
Yeah, we went out to a Cyclones game.
Oh, nice.
And it ended up getting rained out, but my wife and I went and walked around, and I helped get a shark off somebody's hook. They caught a baby shark, so I was the hero.
Wow. Wow. You don't see that every day.
Tad, were you with our group on that one? I remember we got about a couple innings in and the rain hit.
Yeah, and they had the women, the women from the Rockford Peaches out there.
That's right. Yeah, from the movie, I think a couple of the. We got it. Kind of finally, it was pouring when we got there, and we waited inside the subway station. Then went out. We went to Nathan's. I went on one of the roller coasters, and then it rained again, and I think it finally let up. Is that when you went out and helped with the shark?
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember, there was like this double rainbow that just spanned the whole sky. It's something I'll never forget.
Yeah, it's just kind of too bad that it kind of interfered with the game.
Yeah, I would have loved to see a game there. Hopefully get back someday.
Well, I went to that Brooklyn interdisciplinary thing online, and there was a presentation on Brooklyn, the once and future city, which was fascinating. And I ended up buying Tom Campanella's book, and it's I got somebody. I'm going to put this on mute. Okay.
Yeah, that was the first one of those I went to, and I've been to every one since. I thought that one was Jim Bouton, Keith Olbermann.
Yep.
Hey, Tad, for future reference, if you disable the waiting room in Zoom when you set up the meeting.
I did. I thought I did. I went through all that, said no waiting room, but I must have hit the wrong thing. So.
Okay, as long as you know how to do it, that's fine.
Yeah, we're still having people come in, so we'll wait a few minutes.
Big crowd today.
Yeah.
I think 5 o'clock for big guests like Jaffe and Cott really work for us.
Yeah, it is. And so we'll wait a minute or two more, and then we'll get done. There we go.
And of course, Jack Sullivan's going to ask about Tony Conigliero's Hall of Fame chances.
Yeah.
Or Fred Lynn's Hall of Fame chances, maybe. Actually, that's not a bad question.
Couple minutes. It's right on 5, so we'll.
This is Jay's second SABR Zoom. He earlier did talking baseball out in Washington earlier. I think it was last weekend actually. So.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I did one, and I got one coming up next week too.
Were you surprised at how long that went? That went forever. 2 hours.
You know, I thought I was giving 20 minutes of remarks, and it expanded about 45.
Yeah, I better make another batch of coffee. I might miss dinner. You know, you might be on for 4 tonight.
The thing about the topic is that, you know, people will find things to talk about with it as long as you want to, and that's my dumb luck to find something that's evergreen and bottomless. There's always something else to debate, and you know, I mean, as long as you can occasionally avoid some of the more contentious things and do it good-naturedly, people seem to enjoy it.
You're not surprised at all by the reaction the book has gotten.
Well, you know, I mean, the book didn't sell as much as I hoped it would sell, but I think that's most baseball books. I'm thinking very hard about a sequel or an update or something like that. We're gonna try to get the wheels going on that, in motion on that after this cycle ends. So, you know, I've been sort of itching to do that for a while, and especially with the Negro Leagues. The momentum with the Negro League stuff has really kind of spurred me, because I found that I really enjoyed researching that stuff.
Well, I agree with Tad, and I agree with Chris Betch, who's another one of our members. It's one of the best books I've read in the past couple of years.
Yeah, so yeah, I think we'll get started here. And you know, I first noticed Jay Jaffe because when I started here at the firm, and everybody except for Jay, please stay on mute until you want to talk. But when I first started here, one of my associates who slogged away with me was named Jay Jaffe. Very good lawyer, and he went to Indianapolis, and I think he's still practicing up there. So when I saw Jay Jaffe in baseball, I said, "Wow, I wonder what Jay's up to." But then I got, you know, I think the lead-in was getting those SABR emails, and Jay, you know, once a month or so, they'll post a link to Jay's an article by Jay, and then I signed up for FanGraphs, and I just got done reading, Jay, your analysis of Jake Peavy, and you know, I can tell you put in years and years and years for this book, and your focus has been Hall of Fame, but I mean, you can just plain write, and you know, if you ever want to take a break from the Hall of Fame, you could just write bios and analysis that I think would sell. So Jay's been involved in baseball for a long time. We're talking to him. He's in Brooklyn right now. As you can see, he's got a big stack of books behind him, and he has done a whole lot of stuff over the years. I don't know if you're still doing this, but you were a writer for Sports Illustrated, Baseball Prospectus. You set up the first baseball blog, one of the first, the Futility Infielder. And you, somewhere in there, came up with JAWS, which we'll talk about, which is just a great measure to kind of evaluate Hall of Fame players or potential Hall of Fame players, and done a lot with MLB Network, and I'm sure a bunch of other stuff that I'm not even talking about. You're a member of Baseball Writers Association of America, since 2011, which I think means you hit the magic 10-year mark where you get to vote now. And but this everybody should stand up and pay attention. He also was a participant in the Milwaukee Brewers sausage race. And I thought I'd show you a little bobblehead I have. It's the sausage, the bratwurst. And you didn't say in your profile whether you won that.
Oh, I did not. I was the hot dog. It was the Sunday relay, and I was the hot dog in that one. This was 2005, I think. It was the year that Prince Fielder got his cup of coffee, so I believe it was 2005. Yeah. And no, we came in third place, lost to Mark Grant, the former Major League pitcher and Padres announcer. Everybody among us had agreed that this was going to be a Sunday jog. Nobody was going to blow out an ACL, and then Grant just got too competitive and just blew us all away. Yeah. There's video online. But so I'm a senior writer at FanGraphs. I do write about baseball every day. I've been immersed in the Hall of Fame stuff this year since pretty much the end of the season. I think I wrote a couple transactions and that's about it. But I do get to write about baseball every day, and becoming a go-to for the Hall of Fame stuff has really been a boon to my career. That happened really when I went over to Sports Illustrated in 2012. I was writing daily there at their blog, which we created basically for me initially. It called the Hit and Run blog, and then spent about almost 6 years there, and then moved over to FanGraphs, where I'm a senior writer and covering all kinds of stuff, transactions, player analysis, injuries, major industry trends, things like that, and occasionally something goofy. But and it's I'm lucky because I'm sort of the historian on the staff, and so when we get in these lulls where there's nothing else to talk about baseball wise, I can dig into the history files and talk about that stuff. Always fall back on my Hall of Fame stuff. And during the pandemic, I even took up a fluency in the Korean baseball organization and got to be on TV for that, watching those games 10,000 miles away or whatever it was. So I'm really lucky that I get to talk about baseball and write about baseball as much as I do. This is the second year I've had a ballot, just to clarify. Okay. So yeah, let's anything we can get to it here. I have the book here. This is the Cooperstown Casebook. It came out in 2017. It's my first book. Like I said, I am hoping to follow it up in some way. We'll see. Maybe by the time actual baseball starts later this year, we might have some news in that department. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I said this in my email, but I'm not the fastest reader, but I'm done. And I blasted through that thing, and I just had a blast. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Well written, and with I should have circled some of them, but some good show-stopping comedic lines. Like, I can't remember who you said would get outraced by a glacier, but there were lines like that just very well done, and I enjoyed reading it. And the thing about it is, it's not just some like over analytic book about Hall of Fame. There's profiles of every player who's in the Hall of Fame with nice little tidbits about how they got their nickname and what happened to them afterwards, stuff like that. So it has elements of, just a encyclopedia of the Hall of Fame, and not just the people who are in it, but people who are lined up and ought to be in it. And the other thing that Jay does, I find very interesting, is he has sort of the elite. So he'll put the really top tier players, and chapters are broken down by position, top tier players, and then he sort of has the bread and butter players, and then there's the basement. And then there'll be a series of players who should be considered or might be considered. And he leads every chapter off with somebody who probably ought to be in, and he makes the case for that. And I think the book was very influential in that the chapters where he recommends somebody, most of those guys are in now. And it hadn't been that long since the book came out. People like Ted Simmons, Tim Raines, guys that really weren't getting much attention. And I think your book had a lot of influence over that.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe the count is 8 out of 14, and that includes Raines, who was kind of a gimme there. He had been elected in January. The book closed right after his election. I was like, I'm taking a victory lap on this one here. But I'm gratified that I think this has, I've been told by voters that this is, in print and in private, that this has influenced their thinking, and really it's the players who did the work to get there. If I'm spotlighting it and helping people see it in a new light, that's great, but I mean, the credit still goes to the players, and I'm gratified that the likes of Raines, Larry Walker, Alan Trammell, Ted Simmons have gotten in. I wish Minnie Minoso had gotten in before he passed away. He's another one there. I mean, I think the Mike Messina, another one who really started slowly. I mean, I think sticking his personality aside, I think Curt Schilling, had benefited a lot from my analysis in front of the electorate, because when he came on, all the talk was 216 wins isn't enough, but he's a top 30 pitcher in Jaws, built up a lot of support that way, and just with people looking at the run prevention stuff. And so, I'm gratified. It still breaks my heart that Dick Allen didn't get in. Edgar Martinez is another one who got in, profiled in the book. It breaks my heart that Dick Allen fell short again this year, and that he passed away and didn't live to see his own election. But it's still, I can go to the plaque room in the Hall of Fame and see my guys there, and know that I played some small part in helping some of these candidacies along.
Yeah, so a theme that we is there fairly frequently in your book is, why didn't they get these guys in before they died so they could enjoy it? And you devote a whole chapter to that with Ron Santo.
Yeah. And
talk about Santo a little bit.
Yeah. So Santo was one of the first causes that I took up. I think, him and Burt Blyleven. Blyleven was on the writer's ballot at the time. Santo was a Veterans Committee candidate at the time. The Hall had, and still has, a shortage of third basemen relative to other positions. I believe the count among the non-Negro Leagues players is 15, whereas now you have 28 right fielders in there. And it's, I tried to explore some of the reasons that voters have had a hard time with selecting third baseman, because it's kind of a position where offense and defense have to balance out. Many good third basemen were shortstops when they came up or when they were amateurs. But the mortality factor, I found, is a pervasive theme throughout Hall of Fame elections. It's, there's a saying in the music industry that death is a good career move. You'll sell a lot of records because people will take interest in your career, after you pass away. And that, unfortunately, has been true with Hall of Fame elections as well. The very first third baseman elected to the Hall of Fame, which didn't happen until the mid-40s, was Jimmy Collins, and it happened shortly after he passed away. Santo was elected in 2012. I have him as, I think, the 6th best third baseman of all time in Jaws. He was elected 1 year after he passed away, and just watching the glacial progress of his voting shares in the Veterans Committee, which at that point had expanded to include all of the living Hall of Famers and all of the Spink and Frick Award winners. And they didn't elect anybody in 4 tries. And that basically cost Ron Santo election in his lifetime. That cost Dick Allen election in his lifetime. It cost Minnie Minoso election in his lifetime. It was a real, anytime somebody tells me that, no, the players should be the ones voting on the Hall of Fame, that just, it makes me mad because the players just dropped the ball. I mean, when Reggie Jackson couldn't even see that Marvin Miller belonged in the Hall of Fame, Marvin Miller made Reggie Jackson a very rich man by opening the doors to free agency. That disappointed me. But getting back to Santo, he was an excellent hitter. He was an excellent fielder. He played at a time when pitching kind of dominated the game, but he put up good power numbers. He also walked a lot, and people were more focused on his, modest batting averages than his high on base percentages. And I think what I found was there's a pattern of underappreciation of these high on base, good power guys relative to the high batting average guys, and especially at the skill positions where defense is more important. And, I took up the theme of the third baseman as being one where we could really explore that. And that was actually the chapter that I wrote, that in the front of the book, the stat stuff, and the why care stuff was actually the proposal that I submitted was those first 5 or 6 chapters or whatever it was.
Yeah. And so, for Santo, it was almost your story about him. It was almost cruel. Here's a guy who had type 1 diabetes. He was sick, got sicker, lost both legs. And it's like you could see that he wasn't going to live very longer. And, put him in, give him that last thing. And they just.
I think there was a lot. There were grudges held. And I think there were grudges, especially from the New York writers, during the time that he was on the writer's ballot. Santo was a guy who I think was a little more showy than your average player in his time, which is to say that, we wouldn't even notice it now, but, he was a little bit more demonstrative, and that particularly rubbed the New York writers the wrong way during the 1969 race where the Mets overcame the Cubs. And, he was kind of penalized for the Cubs not winning. He never did get to play in the playoffs. And he also, because of his health problems, he was done at age 35. Still had a substantial 15-year career, I think it was, but, just heartbreaking that he didn't live to see it. And it seemed like, people were, people were determined to wait him out. It hurt.
I think he was a little bit the poster child because of his habit of clicking his heels.
Yeah.
And, who cares? What's that got to do with anything? But so I'd like to kind of maybe because I don't understand them, but I'm sure there's plenty on here who don't understand them, is dive into war just a little bit. Okay. And then we'll kind of move to Jaws after that. But I guess I have this impression that, war is this universal number that you can compare a player in 64 to a player in 44, and has all these adjustments for ballpark factors and defense against you and defense that, so kind of, is that
sure
generally the goal?
Yeah, so the idea, war is what we call it. It's supposed to be a context neutral measurement, which allows you, what you're measuring is you're measuring the gap between the player in question versus a replacement player, which is a player that you can get for free. You can call them up from the minor leagues. You can pick them up on waivers. The idea is that a team entirely of replacement level would win about 47 games a year, a little bit better than the 1962 Mets, but not much. Historically, this is a pretty low baseline. And so, you're measuring relative to that, and the reason you're measuring relative to that rather than relative to the average player is because that gap right there rewards volume, and Hall of Fame voters respect volume. You know, it's the career milestones that play a major part. You could be a 300 hitter, but if you only did it in 11 seasons, you're not going to get into the Hall of Fame or have the same chances as you did if you stuck around and got 2,500 or 3,000 hits with slightly lower batting average. Likewise for the pitching side. So WAR rewards volume because an average player has real tangible value to a team, and pennants are won and lost because teams can't come up with players who can at least be average. So WAR is an attempt to estimate a player's value on in terms of his offense, his defense, and his base running. Tries to capture as many of the little things as they can, and the defensive component has changed as more intricate systems have been introduced. Some versions even incorporate pitch framing now, which is the product of the StatCast system that we now enjoy. That hasn't really come to bear yet in Hall of Fame voting, but it will. And I've written a bit about that at FanGraphs. But WAR also contains a positional adjustment, so it's helping you compare the relative value of a shortstop to other shortstops and first baseman to other first basemen. And I think that distinction sometimes gets blurred if you're just talking about counting stats. And people try to, they try to mentally adjust for it. But what I found, the reason I chose WAR, and this was back when JAWS was in, when I invented it back in 2000, for the 2004 election. At the time I was using Baseball Prospectus's version, which was called Wins Above Replacement Player, or WARP, was that, if you appreciate the whole of baseball history, that we've got these periods where there was a lot of high scoring, like in the 20s and 30s and the 1890s, and a lot of low scoring, like in the dead ball era, and the 1960s. And what I wanted to do was see, well, if we take our eye off of, these high batting averages and these low ERAs, and look at the total value that these players created using WAR or WARP, what does that tell us about who's in the Hall of Fame and who's on the outside but should be in? And that was the essential question that I tried to answer. And at the time, WAR was still pretty obscure and the subject of ridicule, even when people brought it into, say, the 2012 AL MVP debate between, when Miguel Cabrera won the Triple Crown and Mike Trout had an historic rookie season. It's really been the last, 5 years mainly that WAR has become, I think that the average mainstream writer has become fluent in it. And so I think the landscape has shifted even since the book came out. And that's, part of that's the turnover in the electorate because of the forces within the industry. The sites like FanGraphs and Baseball Prospectus, I think, have helped people become more fluent in this language, and StatCast has helped as well.
Yeah, so I think generally, especially for old guys like me, we've always focused on offensive statistics, like batting average, home runs, and RBIs. You gave an example in your analysis of Andre Dawson and Larry Doby, who had almost identical records in terms of batting average. I think Dawson hit 32 home runs, Doby 31, and both of them drove in 104 runs. And I went, and I know this doesn't pick up defense, but I went and looked at their WAR for that season, and Doby had 7 and Dawson had 2.7.
Yeah.
So what, the untrained eye would look at and say, well, they just had seasons that were very much the same, and they did. And you point that out, that there's a big difference in terms of looking behind the statistics and how sort of, low calorie some of those statistics are.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easy to be swayed by big RBI numbers. I mean, that's, a lot of the MVP awards have rested on that. A lot of Cy Young awards have rested on, win totals and won-loss percentage. And, we can see using WAR, we can get a feel for some of the injustices that have been committed both on an annual basis and on a career level basis. And I think that makes for, some fascinating discussion and really, could help us find players who slip through the cracks. It's funny. I enjoyed putting together that opening section on the stats, but I wonder now, when it comes the next time I do the book, that'll be that people are familiar with enough of that stuff that I'll be able to put that in 6-point type in an appendix and save myself a bunch of pages, because those concepts, it's important to explain them to the reader, so that the reader understands where you're going with this. But it's also, as more people understand it, it becomes a little bit less necessary to bombard it. But I'm glad that people like yourself, found it helpful. That does mean a lot to me, because I think, moving the conversation forward really does rest on, everybody having a common language to talk about this stuff. We don't have to necessarily agree on the players, but it's helpful if we're speaking the same language at least, and getting away from, because look, we know how things have been done, and we know that there are mistakes, and you don't have to listen to me if you don't want to hear about those mistakes. But if you want to listen to me and talk about the Hall of Fame, this is the language I'm using, and I'm glad people have picked up on it.
Yeah, and that analysis to me really opened up. I mean, these are things maybe I generally knew, but the way you explained it, which was excellent, defensive stats. And, again, if you go back to my baseball card collecting days, those are fielding percentage and chances. And those don't tell you much of anything. And now the fielding statistics are adjusted for things, and even pick up, and I don't understand this yet, but range factor and positioning and certain, if a ball player plays on a team where the pitchers all throw ground ball pitchers, that will inflate their chances, but doesn't mean they're a better fielder. And so I don't know how that number's come up with, but is it just that offensive WAR and defensive WAR just added? Is that how that works?
No, it doesn't quite work like that. But the defensive stuff, it's still actually total chances is actually still a very big deal. You're trying to, especially when you're dealing with the pre batted ball data stuff, the defensive runs saved, or in FanGraphs ultimate zone rating. You're mostly going on things like, okay, how many chances did the average second baseman have in 1954? And how many did this team have, and how many did this player have? And we can tell something by that, and then we can, nudge it a little, because we know that, hey, the Yankees staff did have a lot of left-handed pitchers, and so we can expect more balls on this side of the infield rather than that side of the infield. So there's small adjustments in there, but I think we can have some confidence in the conclusions that we're drawing, even with the more primitive versions of the system. When you've got Brooks Robinson atop the third base fielding runs list, or Roberto Clemente in right field, or Willie Mays, at least up until the point that Andrew Jones takes him over, at center field, and Ozzie Smith and Mark Belanger at shortstop. The cream does rise to the top, and so I think that gives us a lot of weight to help drive home the value of the more recent and current candidates. If I'm telling you that Brooks Robinson is number 1 at third base and Adrian Beltre and Scott Rowland are number 2 and number 3, I hope you could respect that and understand that I'm not just, we're not just pulling numbers out of the air, not just going by the eye test or whatever. And likewise, we're telling you that Omar Vizquel was not the equal of Ozzie Smith. It's about 100 runs worse. That's, a measure that you can appreciate as well if you're, making that Hall of Fame argument.
There's some players who, were considered good fielders, however, and then the statistics show something different. Derek Jeter, I think, was one of the players. Boy. And I noted a couple others who, got numerous Gold Gloves, and then it turned out even in their Gold Glove years, they weren't as good as people thought.
Yeah, and look, these are estimates. They're not to say that they're 100% correct, and we'll be the first to tell you that 1 year of fielding data is generally not enough to draw to draw a perfect conclusion. You want but over the course of several years, you will get you will see differentiation. It will correlate with other other fielding measures and other things like that. Except for Jeter, who won, I don't know how many Gold Gloves. I think it's 5. Bernie Williams, another one who won several Gold Gloves, but his defensive metrics are not good enough to keep him on the ballot. It's kind of a surprise. You should never take too seriously one year's measurement, but you can see around multiple years, you can see that a player's skill is deteriorating, or sometimes it happens when he moves teams, or gets a new neighbor, because there are some of this is we try to weed out some of the discretionary stuff. So if you've got a rangy left fielder, particularly rangy left fielder, as you're in center field, sometimes you're going to lose a few chances to him. You want to be able to understand that, different from having a statue out there.
Yeah. The how do you, and I'm going to let people start asking questions here in a minute, but so how do you figure out those defensive metrics like in 1915? Well,
that, like I said, you're going by, first of all, I'm not doing the number crunching. It's Baseball Reference doing the number crunching, but it has to do with how many chances you could expect the average team to make at shortstop, given the conditions, and with some ballpark adjustments and some adjustments for the handedness of the staff and things like that. And, for more recent years, you're able to separate, you're able to make adjustments for ground balls and fly balls. And things like that. So you come up with the idea that this team should have made, let's just say, throw out a number, 600 chances at shortstop, and instead they made 700. And what's the value of those extra chances? Turns out it's 0.3 runs or something like that. And I'm fudging the numbers here, but and then you're attributing the distance, the distance from average to the individual players there. So, good shortstop gets, might be worth 20, 25 runs in a year. There's also one other thing to point out within WAR is there's a positional adjustment where generally the good fielding, the positions where it's important to be a good fielder, where they put the talented fielders, shortstop, center field, second base, catcher, get a bit of a bonus, and first base, right field, left field get a bit of a penalty. The spread ends up being about 20 runs a year. And this is, it's somewhat observational, but it's also somewhat idealized so that it captures a broad swath of history. And it is sensitive to trends over time. It used to be that because there was more bunting, there was more value in being a third baseman than a second baseman. But as bunting has gone out of the game, the defensive adjustment that's applied in WAR has changed over time. And you can see all that at Baseball Reference, how that's, they kind of smooth the pattern a bit. But it's complicated, and again, I don't think you have to understand every nut and bolt of it to at least appreciate that it's an estimate. And I don't think you have to, I think the one thing I'll stress is that these are estimates. We use them as a kind of a first cut tool to help figure out which direction a Hall of Fame conversation is going to go. But if you don't bring, the outside context to it, of what this player did, where he came from, what other forces were in play, did he do things of historical significance? Did he do things in the postseason to fully flesh out a Hall of Fame case? And that's why my book isn't just a list, that says you have to be this good to be in the Hall of Fame. It's let's appreciate these careers. And right now I'm writing about the so-called one and done candidates on this year's ballot. And I could write 3,000 words on Jake Peavy, and there's no chance he's going to get in the Hall of Fame. I want to appreciate his career, though. I want to understand what made Jake Peavy, or Tim Lincecum, Tim Lincecum.
Yeah.
And WAR is a tool that helps illustrate that. But I want to know, where he learned that pitch and how that had an impact on his career. What obstacles Dick Allen and Minnie Minoso faced because of their color. Why Chase Utley was stuck in the minor leagues and didn't play 100 games till he was 25 years old. These are all things that we want to bring, to the table when we're talking about a Players Hall of Fame case. The numbers are there, but we still have to interpret the numbers, and that's really where I make my bones.
Yeah, another thing that you have for every player too is something that I think is very valuable, and that's peak WAR.
Right.
And that's now 7 years.
Yeah, I use a 7-year peak. It's a player's best 7 years. And there are certain players in the Hall of Fame that are there who burned brightly but briefly. Sandy Koufax, Hank Greenberg, a lot of guys who lost time to World War II, Ralph Kiner, some 19th century guys as well. Or any one of a number of guys that just didn't, they're in the Hall of Fame because they had short careers but impactful ones. And I think over time I've gotten to the point where I used to be much more about career value. Now I'm much more about peak value. If I, especially looking at a player like Buster Posey, who retired with exactly 1,500 hits. Now, it wasn't until Tony Oliva was elected a few weeks ago that anybody from the post-1960 expansion era with fewer than 2,000 hits was elected. I'm arguing that Buster Posey should be in for 1,500 hits because his, even though he's short on Jaws, he's got I think the number 6 or the number 8 peak, and that's without including pitch framing in the argument. And he's got a huge value as a pitch framer. So if these guys have shortened careers, I want to understand why, but I also want to focus on just how good their peak was, because that's where they won the awards. That's where they helped their teams the most, is in those seasons that were big ones. If Joe Mauer, people complain, oh, Joe Mauer had, was just not that good for half of his career. Well, all 7 of Joe Mauer's seasons in his peak score are from his catching years. He was that good. And he's, I think, number 8 in peak value as a catcher and above the Jaws standard as, for his career. He's somebody who I'm wholeheartedly going to be, voting for and trying to probably leading that year's Hall of Fame series. So I get that in front of as many voters as possible so that they can appreciate just how good he was and how appropriate it is to elect him, not just, period, but to elect him, especially, quickly.
Yeah. That also helps guys who stay around way too long and run up a bunch of negative numbers. So I'm going to open it up now. Maybe what we'll do is raise your hand. I'll just call on people and then raise your hand. Stu, I saw you first, so fire away, my friend.
Okay, thanks. I put this in the chat too. Jay, is it too early for you to be ranking Arenado and Matt Chapman along with Robinson, Beltre, Rowland? I mean, are you doing it more with Hall of Fame candidates? I grew up watching Brooks Robinson and certainly hearing how great he was. but you know, it's kind of iffy. But as I watch Arenado and Chapman these days, those guys are so smooth and just seem to be doing things that I never saw out of any previous players.
You know, I did a piece or two, I think it was two pieces actually this year, where I checked in on the progress of current candidates. It was right around early September, right before the induction weekend. And I did check in on Arenado's progress. He has now, let's see here. I'm tilting my computer here so that I can see the page on my desktop computer here. But he is has got a WAR 7 of 7-year peak of 40.3, which is 19th all time. So he's moving up there. He's got a couple soft years in there where, you know, if he can have seasons like he did, he's going to be in the top 15. Maybe even higher than that in his peak score. He's, you know, I think he's a guy who I would look to as being, you know, a potential future Hall of Famer. I mean, he's racked up the Gold Gloves. He's put up some big offensive numbers that, you know, need some context adjustment because Coors Field. But, you know, I do like to check in on these guys. Chapman, I think, is a bit early to come into focus. You know, because he just hasn't played enough. We've seen a couple big seasons out of him that I mean, and certainly the defense is fantastic, but you know, until you get to, you know, close to about, you know, 9 or 10 years, it's really tough to get much of a gauge, you know, on how these, you know, where these guys stand, and especially, you know, unless they're guys who came up at 20 and you can sort of chart their progress, because guys who hit the majors at 19 and 20, there's a very high percentage of them relative to the rest that do make it to Cooperstown, because those are the special players.
Tony, good to see you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Jay, did you ever think about writing a full book biography on a player? I think you'd be really good at it.
You know, it's something I think about. I have not come across one that I was willing to drop everything for. There was a feeler put out to me once to do something on a player, but it was not the angle that that I was looking for. I wasn't the fit for the project. You know, I'm lucky enough that I get to write about baseball every day. If somebody wants to throw a, you know, some mortgage level money at me to do a bio at a point when I'm, you know, not also, you know, don't also have those demands, I will certainly pick up the phone and discuss it. So yeah, I think at some point I would love to do a biography of somebody. I don't, you know, until I figure out who that is though, you know, we're just going to keep going with what we're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, Ryan, you're up.
Thank you, Chad. By the way, that was Ernie Lombardi you were trying to think of. That was that had the speed of that could be outrun by a glacier. Ernie Lombardi.
Oh, Lombardi, yes, thank you.
Yes, I was wondering. You said during the Washington meeting today that Jim Cott's election lowered the bar, and I was actually kind of surprised by that. We had Jim Cott on an earlier Zoom a couple of weeks ago, so I would like to know why you think the way you
right. Okay,
think about that.
So the two things about Jim Cott, and look, congratulations to Jim Cott. I enjoyed him for years and years as an announcer for the Yankees, and obviously you don't stick around the major leagues for 25 years without being pretty darn good. There's a few things about Jim Cott's case though that stand out to me that aren't, that make him, I think, a less than ideal Hall of Famer. He was not elite at run prevention. I think he's something like an ERA plus of about 105. I think it is. I'm trying to get to the numbers here without throwing down my my computer here. Yeah, 108. Sorry, Jim. Big win total. He was a compiler. Big win total, big career numbers, 4,530 innings, 283 wins. But his ERA plus was only 108. We've got, the really good Hall of Famers are about 120 or so. Burt Blyleven, I think, was 118. There was a lot of fight over that, or whether he was good enough. Second thing is that Jim Cott did not strike out a lot of guys for his time. A lot of what he did was dependent on balls in play, and as we've learned, there's pitchers don't have a huge amount of control over that. So you've got those two things, and when Baseball Reference WAR has an adjustment for the caliber of defense behind a pitcher, and so he loses a little bit in that. Because we know how good those defenses were behind him. Those are the main things. And I have him by Jaws, he is 109th, which is not that's there are certainly Hall of Famers that are below him. Dizzy Dean comes to mind here, Bob Lemon, guys who had shorter careers, but to me, I think he's in the bottom 10 in Jaws.
So are you saying that his longevity during his career and his longevity as a broadcaster has helped him get into the Hall of Fame?
Yes, I think it did. I think actually getting back to WAR and what I was saying, Cott pitched till I think it's 1983. But he was essentially replacement level or below replacement level from 1977 or 78 onward. He was pushing well past 250 wins at a time when he wasn't really delivering much value. And only some of this was while he was a reliever. Even 1977 he was pretty mediocre. And so he's compiling these career numbers without actually delivering much value, and we've seen this a lot. Craig Biggio had a terrible season the year that he crossed the 3,000 hit milestone. So Cott here minus 2.9 WAR from 1977 to 83. Maybe we're missing something there in terms of his impact and with leverage as a reliever. But I don't think it's much. And I think he's, if you lopped his career off at whatever it was, 240 or 250 wins up to that point, you actually probably have a stronger candidate, even if those numbers didn't stick out to quite the same extent in terms of how close to 300 wins he was. So, as for the broadcasting stuff, there's no hard and fast rule for how you consider the second chapter of a player's career. Certainly it's a big deal, but there are a lot of guys who've had long careers as broadcasters who aren't in, guys who've had long careers as managers who aren't in. That's been a topic of discussion a lot in terms of the candidacies of guys like Lou Piniella and Dusty Baker. And we'll see where that goes in the coming years. But, it's not that I'm not unhappy that Cott was elected so much as I am disappointed that others weren't elected instead of him.
Yeah, and Ryan, I don't think Jay is saying when he's going to have to lower the standard. I mean, his standards are just averages. So if somebody comes in below average, you got to recalculate averages. So
yeah, so yes, exactly. He knocked the average down just a hair. It's a fraction of a point.
Yeah.
I am actually also working right now with my version of Jaws for pitchers to try to adjust to lessen the impact of the 19th century guys who threw 500 innings at a time. I think they distort the system, and especially as we see the disappearance of the 250 inning pitcher, we're going to have to make even more adjustments. But some of what Cott did is because of that bulk, and there are guys who were better at run prevention and didn't have the benefit of throwing, in a time when 275, 300 innings was commonplace. So that's another factor there that goes into my evaluation of, you know, just because he had the opportunity to pitch every fourth day, you know, got to compile those stats when he really wasn't any better than, say, a guy like David Cohn, who was throwing every fifth day, and better at run prevention.
It doesn't hurt to be a good guy, and it hurts to be a bad guy. Kelly.
Hello, Jay. I kind of fall in the camp with Tad there, where when it comes to statistics, you know, I fall back on average home runs, RBIs, slugging percentage, on base percentage, and the WAR has befuddled me. So help me understand this, or tell me if I'm looking at this wrong, listening to what you're telling me or saying. The replacement player, is that bar moving each and every year based on the average statistics? And is that average player assigned to each and every team, or is the average player, quote, average player, across the board? So every player is compared to one, quote, average player.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little hard to understand, and the idea is, the starting point for it is for a 30 team 162 game schedule, you have 1,000 WAR that gets divided up, and 57% of it goes to hitters and 43% of it goes to pitchers. I don't know why that's the exact number, but that's where it goes. So there's always going to be a certain amount of, and that gets scaled down for, you know, depending on how many teams you have. But the winning, it's the theoretical winning percentage of a replacement level team is constant. It's a team that would win about 30% of its games, a little bit lower than 30% of its games. And that is actually, there's some observational basis for that. You know, going back, like a really crummy team, that a little bit better than the 1962 Mets, but not so much better than that team that, you know, you'd notice the difference if you're watching them on a day, you know, once in a while. We're talking about we're measuring the distance of a good player to a crummy player. And so that the actual quality of the replacement level will rise over time. We see, you know, when Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and these guys are having these 11 WAR seasons, and we don't see a lot of 11 WAR seasons now, it's because that replacement level player is so much worse than, you know, the integration and larger player pools have raised the baseline over time so that we've got better replacement level players. But you're still comparing a player to a theoretical baseline, and it's very possible that we're getting some of this wrong. I mean, we are after all estimating, you know, quality, and we're trying to do it in a way that, you know, kind of smooths out the peaks and valleys over time. You know, it's a model.
So when you say a WAR of 11, so that's telling me that Babe Ruth was worth 11 more wins than a replacement in right field for the Yankees, yep. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you could go down. You could call, if you wanted to purchase a right fielder from the Pacific Coast League, you know, and only had, you know, pocket change to do it. That's the guy you'd get as the replacement level player.
So how much do you think statistics like WAR has changed the way teams are managed and how ownership looks at signing free agents? I mean, has that been a significant role in the way baseball is handled now?
Yeah, I think each teams don't necessarily use WAR out of the box, especially a lot of them have their own defensive systems, and that's part of why they employ, you know, more analytical, people on the analytical side than they did a decade ago. But they all have their value and they have their understanding. I mean, I think a general understanding is that, yes, you are going to pay, and it's, you know, this is observed, you're going to pay a free agent who's going to give you, let's say, an estimated 4 wins a year for 5 years, you're going to value that. The valuations on that are going to be pretty consistent. And, obviously it only takes one team to break that model and give the contract that perks up a player and says, yeah, let's sign this. And, it's kind of the winner's curse that you see and, people observe in auctions and things like that. It's the person who's overpaying that's going to land that player. But what we have seen, and maybe almost too much, is this consistency, because there's so, all these teams are using similar models now, that you do get this sameness, and that, there's an argument that this has not been good for the growth of player salaries. And I think that's certainly a concern on our side within the industry, that we have created these models that are being, that help to explain player performance and are having an impact on team behavior, and not necessarily in a good way. But that's a conversation that we're very much conscious of, and I think we've tried to make sure that we remember that this is a model, that there are human elements here, that there are things that our measures don't capture, and we have to be careful and avoid kind of dehumanizing these players and making sure that we're not just talking about statistic generating robots.
Peter, good to see you. Peter is Jay is now the liaison for all SABR chapters. Oh, so glad he could drop in and go ahead. You got a question?
I do, Tad, thanks. This will be a quick one. I really enjoy reading your work, Jay, and one thing I like is that it's so thorough. And knowing it's going to be thorough, as we look ahead, who's on the cusp of getting consideration in future years that pique your interest, people that you're kind of really are interested in digging into from maybe because you're a fan or sure, from whatever point of view?
Some of the guys are the catchers. Joe Mauer, Buster Posey, Chase Utley is another player because the unique shape of his career, or maybe not so unique, but I think it takes some appreciation. Who else? I would have said Carlos Beltran would be a lot of fun to dig into, but the sign stealing stuff is going to make that, I think, a particularly heated debate. And I don't know
John Lester.
John Lester, Lester doesn't do great in my system. He's a little low in WAR. But boy, Zach Greinke, Clayton Kershaw. I'm not eager to stop seeing these guys pitch. I love watching them work, and when they get to the Hall of Fame conversation, they'll get there. But I'm trying to think who else there is that we know is coming. Ichiro. Ichiro is an automatic. Adrian Beltre is an automatic. These are favorite players of many of us. I'm looking forward to writing about them though, because so much of what I've written, so many of the players I've written about over the past decade are contentious players. PEDs are a factor. It's nice to have a player who's relatively uncomplicated. You don't have to research their history of domestic violence. You don't have to research their history of performance-enhancing drugs. That their profile is not going to circulate for 10 years the way that the Barry Bonds one does.
Verlander seems pretty solid.
Verlander's there. He'll be fun to write about. Max Scherzer too. I hope we get a few more years out of Max Scherzer and a few more milestones. But all these guys, I'm looking forward to them. Miguel Cabrera is another one. Although, boy, watching his progress, talking about running like he's progressing towards 3,000 hits like he's dragging Ernie Lombardi behind him.
Yeah, no. he couldn't outrun a statue. Anybody else have any questions?
Hey, Ted, I have a quick comment. And sorry, Chris. Just this has been great, and I think we need to have Jay back. I've got a list of questions that I would love to ask, but I think we need to have Jay back. Just my 2 cents. I'll hop off now.
Thank you.
I agree. I've got a bunch of notes, and I didn't even get, a third of the way through. So, unless you want to just stay for about 3 hours, Jay.
No, I did 2 hours for DC, and that was a lot. I'm happy to go another 10, 15 minutes here if people have more questions, but I don't want to drag this out.
We'll close it out pretty soon.
Okay.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, and actually, it's not even a question. It's probably more of a promotion. I just want to kind of say thanks, because after reading the book, I have a much better understanding of the section for Hall of Fame statistics in baseballreference.com. And just for all of you, you can spend a whole day out there. A lot of times, I look up players that I grew up with, like, why is he not in the Hall of Fame? And you look up, it's like, you kind of hang your head down. It's like, oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's, boy, let me tell you, it is one of the coolest things that ever happened to me was getting that stuff on Baseball Reference. And I've been friends with Sean Foreman for, since I got into this in the early 2000s. So I actually did an old Baseball Reference banner for him at one point. And, when he agreed to put Jaws on there, I mean, that was a big deal, because I was moving from Baseball Prospectus. We just have a handshake agreement, nothing more than that. But having that and getting on MLB Network around the same time, suddenly everybody could find my stuff. I mean, Baseball Prospectus, where Jaws started, still doesn't have the leaderboards for Jaws. Shows you, where it was in the queue as far as having the resources to devote to it. So I love that people can spend time digging through the stuff. It's fun for me to look through that stuff. And, we just added a few new bells and whistles, and I'm interested to see how they're accepted.
Yeah, I couldn't recommend this book more. It's just a fun book. And we didn't even get into the chapter on the Hall of Cronyism, which is an excellent book. I was, we always like to dish, and I was going to go to some of the basement guys, most of whom have something, that added to their fame. Mazeroski, Rizzuto, Shane Dees. I mean, there's something outside of, or, Mazeroski hit a home run that is probably, one of the most famous home runs in baseball history, and he's in there. And then, of course, you have the flip side for people who people do not like much, who have the stats, and they're having a hard time overcoming. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I show you Curt Schilling.
And Dick Allen, Dick Allen fall under that category too. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and Jay does say in his book, and I think it's right on. It kind of shows you he's willing to tell it like it is, that Bill James' castigation of Dick Allen was, one of the low points of his career. And so, I mean, it's really fun stuff, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy FanGraphs, so I highly recommend both of those. And we'll get you back, Jay. And
all right, thank
you. Enjoyed you this time. If our bar for guests has just been raised, so glad to have you, and keep up the great work.
Thanks so much. I just want to tell you before I sign off, if anybody wants to buy a signed copy of this, I have a bookstore in Brooklyn that I go to anytime somebody wants one of those. It's called Greenlight Bookstore in Brooklyn. If you find my Twitter feed, it's the pinned tweet atop my Twitter feed, JAY_JAFFE. I'm not hard to find on Twitter or the internet in general. If you can't find it there, Google me and you'll find it soon enough. But I do personalizations for gifts. I've done a bunch, like Let's Go Lou Whitaker or whatever, Larry Walker for the Hall of Fame or whatever. So, you know, we're just past the gift season, so you might not all be in the mood to be buying gifts right now. But next time you're thinking of that for somebody who you think would enjoy this, just know that we can do signed copies and things like that, and personalizations and all that. And thank you all for listening and for bringing your questions. And
thank you.
We'll definitely we'll work on finding another time to do this if that's what y'all want.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.